Good afternoon, dear participants in the forum. I will speak about the human capital. This is the topic which was one of the most important in the world today, because investments in the people is a key factor behind the long-term flourishing of any country. It is especially important for Russia. Human capital is valuable for the economic development of the country, depending on where the Russian citizens are living, in what region they are living, their life expectancy can actually vary within 20 years. In Ingushetia, Moscow and Dagestan, the expected lifespan among the men amounts to about 74, 79 years. Whereas in Chukotka, in Tuva and in Krutsk region, the life expectancy is only 56, 63 years. The chances to graduate an academy for Muscovites is 2 times higher than for the residents of Saransk or Volgograd. These cases, these examples attest to a material gap in the human capital among the regions of Russia. Today, for many countries, an important area of work is the measurement and analysis of the human capital, as well as the analysis of the processes of how the human capital shapes up. Why is it so important? Because the human capital is a cornerstone of the long-term economic growth, which in its turn actually influences the rise of the falling incomes. This is important for Russia amid the drop in the labor market and restrictions in the technologies. In that sense, the human capital is a key factor which the country may influence. Today, the OECD countries have 70% of the riches built because of the human capital. According to the analysis, in Russia, human capital accounts for 46% of the total volume of the economy. And if Russia rises along with the OECD countries, we will come up with a situation when the world will give up fossil fuels. The Russian economy depends on commodities, and the commodities are not endless. In that sense, if Russia fails to turn the natural capital into high valuable human capital, it will create certain capital for the next generations, but it will be actually achieved by sustainable future for their children and grandchildren. We know that regardless of the international competition and the income rates, the winners are the countries which have a more high-quality human capital. In my presentation, I will tell you about how the World Bank is measuring the human capital, how the human capital is affected by the pandemic, and what we may expect in that sense in future. In 2018, the World Bank initiated a project to study the human capital. We started with the analysis and setting up a human capital index. 174 countries are part of that index. By means of HCI, we are measuring the human capital which may be obtained by a child who is born today when he comes of age of 18. The human capital index assesses the productivity of the next generation, provided people have good health and excellent education. Let us look at the values of HCI of the World Bank for Russia. Well, people who were born on planet Earth in 2020, coming of age will show 56% of the maximum productivity, labor productivity, which such a person could achieve. For a child who was born last year in Russia, this indicator will amount to 68%, provided he or she has excellent health and good education. This is a little bit below than the average figure for Europe and Central Asian nations. Starting from 2010 through 2020, the HCI values grew from 0.6 to 0.68. Therefore, Russia entered the list of the leading countries in terms of the positive dynamics. For a number of countries, including Russia, the countries which have enough human capital, unfortunately, HCI failed to provide a detailed picture in order to facilitate more profound analysis. Therefore, in 2020, for Central Asia and Europe, we actually offered an extended HCI Plus index, which reflects mobilization of the internal resources and also contains a number of other detailed parameters related to the social sector. According to these indicators, Russia, in its key sectors, is lagging behind of the medium countries of the region in terms of the healthcare costs to GDP. And also it lags behind by 0.9% of educational costs to the GDP. The educational poverty and the score achieved in the education also may reflect on the length of the education with adjustment to the quality of that education. Russia has the best indicators in that sense among the European nations and Central Asia, and probably this is driven by a big number of adult population with the higher education. The indicators related to the healthcare give us more alarming picture. Russia. In Russia, the chances of dying until age of 70 because of cardiovascular and cancer diseases and diabetes or chronic respiratory diseases amounts to 25%, which is above the average figure for Europe and Central Asia, where they have 17%. And actually, in the countries with the income rate above the average, this figure amounts to 17 or to 20%. We have more risks related to non-infectious, contaminating diseases, abuses with smoking, spirits, and hypertension. The HCI reflect the vulnerabilities of the human capital of Russia and also reflect the directions for its development at the same time. All the features and all the parameters were obtained in the pre-COVID period. Because of COVID-19, these figures were amended in all the countries of the world, and Russia is no exception. All countries of the world try to protect the accumulation of the human capital and accelerate the progress for the sake of everyone. COVID-19 required more effective measures of reacting, including broader use of technologies to improve the quality of services rendered and providing more social aid. Because of the shutdown of schools in Russia, we may see deterioration of educational achievements. Before, we actually accounted for these losses to the tune of about 6 months of education. Today, our colleagues have already adjusted the focus of the deterioration of education from bad to worse. The students from poor and social vulnerable families are losing in terms of knowledge disproportionately more than others. Healthcare industry in Russia faces a tall order to fight against COVID-19 and at the same time to arrange for diagnostics and treatment of the people. In order to fight against COVID-19, we still will have to implement a broad range of different measures, including testing, keeping track of social connections and treatment of the patients. And you'll have to pay special attention not to allow any interruptions in providing scheduled medical services and to provide for care for chronic diseases for the people who suffer from non-infectious diseases, such as tuberculosis and HIV and AIDS. The people who are suffering from non-infectious disease are especially vulnerable to COVID-19. Thanks to the implementation of new digital technologies, including telemedicine and remote access to care services, we may make social and medical aid and help available for a broader number of people. We may change the order of services rendered and to mitigate the risk in the inpatient hospitals. We may improve the conditions in which most vulnerable people live. According to our estimate, the number of poor people in Europe and Central Asia due to the pandemic will grow by 4.4 million people. The elderly and those who need permanent care, for instance, people with disabilities, are especially vulnerable. Amid these conditions, one of the most important tools to retain potential in the area of human capital is the social aid and help. Russia has implemented measures called for to provide for more effective support to the families with children, to the people of non-working age, and to unemployed. Social aid in Russia, amid further mitigation of poverty, has no more potential. What can we expect in future? In our opinion, we have to retain the accumulated human capital to protect it and to increase it. And it has to become a priority for the development of Russia in the long run. Russia can focus on sustainable development of human capital. It may share its best practices with other countries. At the same time, part of fundamental knowledge and the development of quality of education. And in that sense, Russia is among the leaders in the world. The crisis caused by COVID-19 has become a stress test for the Russian system of education. In that situation, you have to increase investments into education, set up programs for online education, improve conditions for schools, provide for protection of school students and teachers. COVID-19 pandemics results in large-scale negative effects for rendering of medical and healthcare services, and it also restricts its availability. Continuous nature of such services is important. Sustainable development of healthcare system is especially important for the primary aid in order to fight the propagation of non-infectious diseases and other diseases. Financial availability and affordability of drugs when treating non-infectious diseases, COVID-19, lifting of the barriers for telemedicine and setting up more favorable conditions and regulation for the virtual technologies are among the important steps in that direction. I think that the moment is opportune for Russia to implement a fundamental program of social aid, which would be operational across the country. The unfavorable economic situation still should not be detrimental to such a program, and once the economic situation improves, the rates of the development of such program would decelerate. Such programs are available in many countries of the world. We finally believe that in order to overcome the current crisis in Russia, you have to streamline real cooperation among the sectors and industries so that healthcare industry, education, and social protection may act all together against the crisis. You have to create more effective systems which would support the development of the human capital. This is very much possible and realistic, and this is totally needed for the sustainable restoration of the country's economy. Marvin Zonus, professor of business school in Chicago University, who passed quite recently, noted that everywhere we'll see a demand for the high level of human capital. The countries which understand that will become the winners in this century. Thank you so much.